Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. I have a really great guest for you today. Her name is Hilary Marsh. Hilary is the Chief Content and Digital Strategist for the Content Company. That's her consulting business. And oh my God, there was so much to tell you about Hilary, but I had to write point forms down because I couldn't get it all in the perfect memorization thing. But Hilary has 20 years experience as a content strategist. She's worked in digital transformation, community management and curation, content and digital governance. And I mean, there's a wicked huge list of the stuff that she's done. A lot of it, all of it actually very interesting. Hilary's also a regular speaker at conferences like Confab and the Content Strategy Forum. And she is a guest professor at, and I hope I say this right, Hilary, FH Johannem University of Applied Science.
Johanneum in Austria, right?
And also a content strategy professor at the University of Strasbourg.
And so let me just say that the program at FH Johanneum is the only graduate level content strategy program in the world at this point.
To be honest, I didn't even know there was one, which I think is fabulous because I think these are topics that universities don't cover, which I can never understand why.
Yeah.
But,
they kind of do, but in different ways and through different lenses.
Yeah, cool. So when we talk to Hilary today, it is not about the external customer experience or digital experience. We're kind of flipping internal and talking about things that happen internally, but Hilary has huge amounts of experience in both areas and has worked with nonprofits and associations and intranets, which is kind of one of the things that we're going to talk about today. So thank you, Hilary, for being here. I really like that you're here. So let's start with this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Content is the way our work is manifested in the world. And companies need to think strategically about their content. That's the kind of the thinking that you've said, that they need to think about it like it's an investment. And so how are you kind of seeing more companies kind of come to this realization, and how do you actually make them realize it if they don't quite think of their content that way?
Well, so if you think about the organizations that I work with, as you mentioned, primarily professional and membership associations, nonprofit organizations, and corporate intranets. What they have in common is that you just said content is the way that our work is manifested in the world. So if you think about these organizations, what they do for a living, the reason they exist, is to create content, is to create educational programs and information and resources and tools, publications. That's what they have in common. So content actually is what they do. But the first thing I have to establish with any client is that realization among all the people inside who create these brilliant products and programs and services that they offer. Because the person will say, well, I'm a meeting planner. You're talking about content strategy. That doesn't relate to me, but it does. Because what is an annual conference but a series of content delivered orally to a group of people, either in the room or virtually nowadays or whatever. But so an education program is content. So when they think, oh, content strategy doesn't apply to me, that's because usually they think of it as the work that the communications department creates or the marketing department creates, not them. Right. But really, content is the way our work is manifested in the world, is the way to articulate that what everybody at that organization does, not everyone, not necessarily IT, for maybe if it's an association, or legal if it's whatever. But often, almost every department exists in order to create that content. So we have to help them. I have to help them realize that this applies to everyone. So when we're talking about creating your content differently because it is of your work, they need to realize that. That's the first thing. And so then, I think the other piece of that is you want your work to have the desired effect. If you're creating a conference, you want the most people possible to attend, which means you have to talk about it in a way that's going to resonate with them. So not how you think about your work or why you have a vested interest in promoting that, but why does the audience have to? Why is the audience really waiting and interested in what it is that you have to offer?
Hmm. Does it change the way that you define content strategy? Because, I mean, a lot of people define content strategy more or less the same, but does that, when you look at it that way, does it change how you define it?
Well, it doesn't change how I define it, because if content strategy is getting the right content to the right people for the right time at the right time for the right reason, that's one of the easiest to understand definitions. Then that's it, right? So if the content that you produce is advocacy, government advocacy on a particular issue, well, that's content, and you want to make sure that that content reaches the people who are as likely as possible to join your effort to magnify and amplify that advocacy effort. Or if it is a conference, it is to get the word out so that the people who stand to benefit the most from the content that you're putting forward at that event, as well as the networking too. That's the experiential part. But let's stick with the content side. Who is the content going to resonate most with, and why are they going to be interested in attending? That's your content about the event.
Right.
So it's sort of three levels: the content promoting the event, the content about the event, and the content above of the event.
So, okay. So does it, if it's a pretty standard definition then in how you think about it, has it evolved much over the years, or has it, maybe it's more people's thinking about it has evolved and they're actually understanding now that they have to implement a strategy in a certain way?
Um, yes, I think that to some there's a way that it's gone backwards, because there are so many marketing people talking about content strategy through the lens only of marketing
Yeah.
content. And I think that that's a risk, because they tend to focus on the content they have control over and leave the rest of the organization's content behind. And even sometimes content marketers don't always acknowledge how the breadth and depth of the core content that the organization again exists to create. And so if everybody leaves that core content behind, then the organization hasn't evolved as much as it could have or should have if it were a more holistic effort.
Yeah. Do you think there's more content out in the other parts of the company than there really is in marketing? Because marketing does produce a lot of content, but there's a huge amount of content in other
Yeah.
parts of the organization.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
think about how many, PDFs and how many great deep reports or industry standards or advocacy efforts or publications and trends and educational material that certainly the clients that I work with create. I was just working last year with a research organization that produces incredible reports of social impact. So they do it for clients, but also, gosh, if the world only knew about them more,
Yeah.
and if the world only could take advantage of the juicy goodness, within those reports, society would benefit. So how do they extract that really deep, meaningful stuff out of the long PDF report and put it in front of people's eyes so that it reaches them and that they care?
Yeah. That's a good point. It's just something I think a lot of organizations need to think about, that how
Yeah,
they take advantage of all that information.
yeah.
So when you're working with an organization that's working on their content strategy, what do you find are some of the most important things that they don't think about, or they tend to want to skip over? Maybe they're too hard for them to deal with or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think one of the really, really important things that they skip over is that if people are, first of all, I believe that content is everyone's responsibility. So you can't just create this great program, not worry a whit about how that program is manifested in the world, and turn it over to some writing team.
Mm,
Because, at least for my clients, the volume of content they create would mean that they'd have to hire dozens and dozens and dozens of content people, and nobody can afford to do that. So the actual program owners, the offering owners, the people who create those programs, products and services, information, resources, tools, all their stuff, they have to come to the table with content that's at least in some sort of rough draft form. And then maybe you have a small team in communications or marketing or digital or whatever that might be to polish the words. But even that, the people who create that work aren't trained writers. They're trained meeting planners or government affairs people or whatever it is that they do. So they're deep scientists, subject matter experts in what they do,
Yeah.
and they need to have the skills and the time and the accountability to come to the table with content that's at least most of the way there. And so I think that companies don't realize that. They don't fund, or appropriately resource the content to the quality that it should be. And then they wonder why it doesn't perform as well as they would hope, because those things are connected. The quality of how you put your content into the world is inextricably connected to how well it can do. Because if you just write in your own language, your own internal subject matter jargon, and you have different subject matters who are each writing in their own subject matter jargon, so then it doesn't come together in any holistic way. And then the audience has to do that translation.
Right.
So really, the more that the organization can do the translation, speak in the audience's language, speak in a single voice so that it's clear to the audience that all this stuff comes from the same organization, and they can then have a relationship with the organization, the better it will do. The more holistically people will be able to experience the organization and its good, valuable work, and the more they are aware of what's there and they can consume it and they want to consume it and use it and take advantage of all that stuff.
That's kind of interesting because I've never really thought about it, because one of the things that's really becoming very well understood and required on the external side to get content out is to get information from your subject matter experts, that they have the information and that you as a writer just need to get that and write it. But you're saying that those people that are the subject matter experts also need to have some kind of a level of understanding and workability around how they would want to talk about their kind of subjects so that it makes more sense across, uniformly across the organization.
Yeah.
And you don't hear that conversation very often.
Well, I mean, it depends on the staffing. I mean, in the clients that I work with, maybe in a giant corporation, they can hire a content team of 20 or 50 people.
Yeah.
But, if I am working with an organization that's got, 75 subject matter experts, they don't have the budget to hire another dozen people to write what the subject matter experts create. Or if it's an intranet, even for a large company, they also don't, everyone does their job well, right? They come to work, they do a really good job, and so they think that if they just share what they know as they know it, that people will get, wow, this is really good, this is really big, it's important to me, this is relevant to my life. But they don't, that's not the case, and they don't know that.
So you mentioned kind of intranets. Is the
Yeah.
content strategy for an intranet different from a content strategy for an external website?
Well, for the most part, no. Because one of the reasons that I have the mix of clients that I have is that I think that the relationship that an association has with its members is really similar to the relationship that a big company has with its employees. So there's a lot of, we don't care how the sausage is made. So here's an example. Companies invest a lot, and they usually have pretty big, extensive HR departments, human resources. And no one understands the differences between benefits and recruiting and blah, 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 and all the different divisions of HR. But HR obviously knows that. So, how do we present HR information in a way that's going to be clear to the employees so they don't need to know or care? They don't have to drill down HR and then the different divisions within HR in order to find the piece of information they're looking for. So, audience focused content is just show me the thing and then give me a contact information at the bottom. Don't make me know who does it in order to find it.
Right.
So, so that thinking is the same thinking that an association has. An association, I used to work for a huge association in the United States, and we actually had a library. And the librarians were kind of our customer service division, our member services group, if you will. And so if a member called with a question, the librarians who answered the phone would say, aha, I can answer their question, and I'll put that up as content on the website. But the content already existed on the website from the department that created it. So they, out of the goodness of their heart and the desire to do their job well, they were confusing people. Because then if somebody would do a search on the website for whatever topic that might be, they would find these two pieces of information that sounded awfully similar, but which one is the single source of truth, one of my clients used to call it. And when you're creating multiple sources of truth, you're really confusing the audience. So that's true whether it's an association or whether it's an intranet. And I think that associations in particular create their websites to match their org chart. Here's our events, here's our publications, here's our standards, here's our advocacy work, et cetera, depending on, the mix of what they do. So if someone wants to know, how would I learn more about a particular topic? They have to go into each of those areas to find out, well, maybe there's something in here. Maybe they wrote about it here. Maybe it's in here. And they have to know who created it versus let's start with the topic and then show me all the stuff you have about that topic. And don't make me have to understand how the sausage is made.
And sometimes organizations think, well, the search resolves that issue. I'll just search for my topic.
I mean, it does, but you don't have complete control about how the search results happen. Right. So then it's piece by piece by piece. And the search results also show all the content that you forgot was there. So the search engine didn't forget that the 2006 annual conference information is still out there because you haven't deleted it. But so, and in fact, it has more history and more traction. So it might come up before the current annual conference information.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So that's the danger of relying on search.
Yeah. Oh, and I think I won't say most search engines, but I find that search technology that most companies leverage isn't really that great. Like it doesn't really find the information and kind of surface the best stuff for you at the top. So
I see that every single time I do a crawl, every single time I do a search. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah.
We can wish though and hope.
Someday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing they focus, sorry, you asked me a question. What do they skip?
Yeah.
So they skip that whole focus on the jobs. And the other thing that they skip that is so, so, so important is the real knowledge and empathy with the audience, for the audience, among the people who are creating all of the organization's work. So for associations, that's really complicated because there are member volunteers who staff committees, who volunteer on committees, and the staff people usually work pretty closely with those committees. And they think that that relationship that they have with the member volunteers is the same as having a relationship with the membership at large, but it's not, right? It's much more akin to, again, in the US, the government, right? So we have the Senate and we have the House of Representatives. And if your next door neighbor is elected to the House of Representatives, they're not just a regular person on your block anymore. They as a matter of being that, having that role, they start to understand the internal jargon, understand the internal workings, and they lose that that outside perspective. And so the same challenge exists with member volunteers, that they lose the outside perspective.
Right.
And so that's really complicated. So the organization still needs to and deserves to really have that deep understanding of who the audiences really are. Like, what is the context in which someone is consuming the content? They're not consuming the content just because you created it. They're consuming your work because of a problem they're having. And so if you lose sight of, we're creating this webinar to help the person solve a problem, then you're busy looking at, well, how many people visited the page? That doesn't matter, right? We're looking at how many people attended the webinar. That doesn't even really matter. What we really want to know is, did that webinar help the person solve their problem? So how can we connect why we create the content in the first place with why the person wants it? So, and the better we can really understand what their needs are, what their pain points are, what their challenges are, the better we can create content in any format that's going to help them solve that problem or pain point or challenge.
So you're saying the very first thing you really need to do with a content strategy is know what your customers or your employees, what they want, what they're trying to do. And
Well,
if you don't know that,
yes, and why they want it.
yeah, because if
So
you
it's
don't
not
know
enough
that,
to say, yes, if you don't know that, you can't do it. Sorry,
yeah,
I keep interrupting.
that's okay. You're the expert. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Well, and
So
it's true for intranets too.
yeah,
We have to understand, if somebody, you know, nobody wants to go hunting around for retirement content. They just want to know. So, you know, I think there was a saying years ago that people don't want to search, they want to find.
yes.
So it's like that.
I like that saying. That's a really good one. So all right. So one of the things that I've heard you say, or I read that you had said, is that content strategy is an HR issue.
Yeah.
So what does that mean exactly?
Well, that's that job piece. So if content responsibilities are going to be part of what all your subject matter experts have to do, then they need to be accountable. Well, first of all, their manager has to leave time in their day. They can't be fully booked with other stuff and then expected to do that new content work in their spare time. No one has spare time anymore, especially. Every organization has slimmed down. Everyone is doing more with less. And so if that's a responsibility, there's two big things. One, or several, what's coming off your plate so that you have time for this work that you're at least partially accountable for? Do you have the skills and training for that? And is your boss going to measure you, at least in part, on that work and that accountability, just like they're measuring you and evaluating your performance on the other things that are supposed to be part of your job description? So a content strategist can't make content part of, a subject matter expert's responsibilities. That's not, they're not the boss of them.
Right.
So they need to work with, get the buy-in from at the top levels of the organization for these content strategy principles, for sort of the vision of how it could work and should work for the organization's products and programs and services to have the impact that the organization wants them to have. And that it's everybody's, it takes a village to create good content. It's not just a marketing and communications responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. And so that has to be imbued into the organization's culture, and it has to be part of people's job descriptions.
And that's the kind of thing that I was curious about. Like, how do you make that part of someone's job description? And how do you measure them on it? How do you do stuff like that?
I've seen it that uh, that maybe it's a content improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So if more people took that action that you wanted them to take as a result of working differently, that's an easy way. And content measurement is a topic that has a lot of subtleties and trickiness to it, because it's not just traffic, it's really the results. It's getting to that why. So it might be doing an audience survey and measuring satisfaction with a particular thing that each person works on, and see if the satisfaction ratings increase, see if phone calls dropped because people were able to self-service and find their information instead of having to call the organization, which is expensive. So there's lots of different ways to measure content effectiveness or improvements. And sometimes people, I've seen organizations measure people on how well they collaborate, because often good content is a collaborative effort.
Mhm.
Because if everyone just creates their own content in a silo, like I said before, that example of the content duplication, imagine if instead, as a result of members calling our librarians, they went back to the original source of content and had a conversation with that person, and they fixed it, and as a result fewer people called. That's a win for each person. So we have to tie all the different pieces together in order to really be able to say with confidence, yes, content met its goal, and yes, improving the content and our content practices improved our organization.
That makes sense. So, okay. So, with all of that in mind, creating a content strategy is a really great first step, documenting it, putting it down on paper and saying, this is how we're going to do things. But implementing it is a whole other kind of ball of wax and has
Sure.
its own set of challenges on its own.
Yes.
How have you kind of worked with companies to kind of get past those challenges? What are the key challenges and how do they get past them?
Yeah. So I call that making content strategy stick, or content operations, which other people abbreviate to content ops, but I prefer not to.
Yeah.
So how, I think the answer is a little different for every organization, and it's got to be consistent with how they operationalize everything else. So here's an example. Um, uh, the organization I used to work for, every fall, probably in September, we would get a note from IT that said, hey, if you want any enhancements or tech efforts or anything, you must get us the request by, October 15th. Otherwise, we will not be able to do what you want to do by the end of the year. So that was really good. It was really proactive on their part and being clear that, hey, we already have a workload and we've got some capacity, but we can't help you unless you work with us in the way that we decide. We don't do that for content. And because we don't tend to do that inside organizations, we get content requests like, hey, I promised the committee that I would email out this 42-page PDF to the entire membership Monday, and it's Thursday. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, there's how many things wrong with that request are there? One, we don't want to just publish 42-page PDFs anymore. That's not an effective way to get our content out there.
Yeah.
Two, yes, we're booked. We don't have time to do it. Oh, but we didn't tell them, so they don't know. So we have to establish all those kind of standard operating procedures, what it means to work with us, and we have to do internal communication so that we let people know how it works. And we have to set up the right kinds of teams and oversight structure so that if somebody has a request for like a new functionality or a new section or a new initiative, here's how it's going to work. And who can say no? So we need to establish the governance too, the roles and responsibilities and authority, so that we can broker internal relationships and conversations and balance priorities, as we need to. So all of that's the operations side, plus the staffing in general. I don't think that organizations really staff their content appropriately. So we have to think about that as well.
A lot of different things that they need to
So
think
many,
about. Yeah.
so many. And all those principles that we create as part of the content strategy, which is here's the top priority audiences, here's what they want, here's the topics we have, here's our taxonomy, here's how it all works. All of those things need reinforcement and reminders, whether it's for new people or whether it's sort of dripping out each piece on a regular basis just as reminders, or whether it's kind of fun things periodically, a scavenger hunt for outdated content with a little prize. So there's the internal, again, sort of HR, the kinds of stuff that HR departments know how to do do that training and education and internal reinforcement among the subject matter experts. So that all operations is all of that. And then there's the technology piece, which we haven't talked about at all, and we need to.
Mm-hmm.
So technology is your friend in so much of content strategy, whether it's capturing the content in the right kind of structure, and so enforcing that you can't write a headline that's too long because the field is limited, or help text within the CMS so that we can be reminded what is this summary field supposed to say, and how to write a good one. So examples, to having automatic expiration dates or review dates or a workflow process, so that it's realizing the, to some degree, the rules that we set up about how the content's going to work.
There's so much to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, there is, for sure.
And then there's the measurement. So you talked about how you measure content for an employee's responsibilities and stuff, but how does an organization measure the performance of their content strategy overall?
So I don't think they measure the performance of the content strategy overall, because I think that each type of content and each area's content is different. We can't measure a magazine article's success in the same way, or piece of help content success in the same way as we measure an advocacy effort or content of an industry practice guideline. Each of those needs its own considerations and its own metrics. So, and some of them are directly related to the piece of content. Some of them are related to the type of content, and some are kind of general satisfaction. So internally, it would be, an employee survey measuring morale. Externally, it might be member satisfaction if it's an association, or renewal rates. People vote with their feet. If the association is not delivering on its value, then they're just not going to renew, because membership is expensive. Everyone is watching their wallets more closely than ever. And so you kind of have to prove your worth. I took that to the next level at my last association and created a member value calculator. So we went to every department in the association, and our legal department sort of backed us up and asked them for the value of each thing they offered, and the value, intrinsically, and compare to what either a non-member would have to purchase the same thing from our association, or that external parties were offering, so they could see the worth of the dues they were paying. And then it was an interactive calculator, so they could check off the particular things that they used and see their own value that they were getting for their dues dollars.
That's kind of cool.
It was cool.
Yeah. So you can't measure, but you do have to measure it against some kind of goal. So it's just kind of individual, though, to maybe each department or the type of content.
Well, again, it gets to, why are you creating that content?
Right.
Why does the organization want there to be somebody in your role creating this thing? And so, and as I said, there's different layers. There's measuring the promotion. That's the marketing piece. Did the promotion get the person to the information page about the conference? And then did that information page lead people to register for the conference, or decide it's not for them, they shouldn't register for the conference, they wouldn't qualify, or they shouldn't register? And then but the content of the conference, the measurement of that is the satisfaction of the people who attended. So it's not an easy Google Analytics number, but it still is something. There are always ways to get at it. We just have to be a little creative in what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And in actually using the metrics that we collect in a strategic fashion too.
Lots of stuff to think about. Yeah.
Again.
You used you said something, or I read something again. I read. You talked about an audience engagement journey when you work with associations, and I just loved I love that term over buyer's journey, like because I think that is actually something you can apply on a marketing perspective too. But maybe the term to me sounds something like I would do from a content marketing kind of strategy perspective.
Right. Um, for me, when you Google buyer journey, a lot of times it's about the transaction.
Yeah.
There's the period of time leading up to the transaction, there's the transaction itself, and there might be the support. But an engagement journey, again, because the organizations that I work with are, the content is their product. Engagement starts with, we don't even know your organization exists, to, we know you exist, but we don't know what you have for us. Or I know that you have good stuff, but I don't really know how it speaks to me. And then there's the, I know how it speaks to me, and yeah, it's really addressing my pain points. And then the end of the journey is, I'm a member. I would never dream of not being a member. I'm, gonna volunteer, and I'm going to encourage and advocate for other people to join. So I'm going to be their free, PR agent and evangelist for that organization. So it is an engagement journey, and content is what leads you along that engagement journey. And so one of the key ways that I help organizations develop that understanding, to identify the top priority audiences, and then articulate and understand what their context is. So that's the first part, are the empathy-based personas. And then the engagement journey is, now that we know who they are, what do they want from us?
I just, to me, that sounds like the best way to do any kind of content strategy, like to start with that journey and try to figure that out. And yeah,
Right.
I definitely engagement over buyer's journey. I would take that term any day.
Well, because it speaks to something else. It's not
Yeah.
just about a transaction, it's
Yeah.
about a relationship.
Yeah.
So engagement is developing and cultivating and deepening a relationship with the person, that they feel like the organization knows them, cares about them, understands them. And so there's a wonderful loop and interactivity between the organization and each member.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
You've been working with companies on content strategy for quite a while. Are there things that you kind of would love to see improve kind of more so than other things?
I still think we're lagging on the job piece,
Yeah.
and that's, which is why I've talked about them so much, and the audience understanding piece. I think there's a lot of personas out there that, first of all, the organization themselves don't create. An external person says, here's your persona, and the persona is, this is Sally, age 32, this is what she wants from you. But we don't know Sally any better by calling her Sally instead of just saying, 4,000 people use this. So a real persona, a real audience a real audience understanding on the part of the people who are creating the organization's work is so, so, so important. Um, and making sure that that job piece, I mean, I can't focus enough on that. But I think that each organization is on its own journey.
Mm.
So I think 3 years ago, I did a project. I co-authored a study on content strategy, adoption, and maturity in associations. And it's really applicable to any content-rich organization. And we, first of all, had to break content strategy down into a set of tasks so that we could put out a survey and ask associations, or help associations understand whether they were doing content strategy at all, because not everyone even realizes that the work they're doing, it falls under this umbrella of content strategy. And then we looked at the responses, and so the the tasks or tactics involved in content strategy, we identified 17 or 18 different tactics. And so then we looked at the difference between organizations who said they did a few, sort of a medium amount, and a lot. And we found big differences in how the organizations thought about content at all, how far along they were on sort of their content strategy journey. And so that we call those 3 stages the different maturity levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and there's, kind of a standard set of pain points that organizations have along the way. And so I've created something called the crawl, walk, run. What did I call it? Crawl, walk, run content strategy adoption plan. So depending on where your organization's pain points are, if your pain point is that you haven't figured out the operations, for example, here's where you might start. Here's how you might progress. Here's how you might, go forward from there. If your pain point is content governance, and I see that a lot, or if it's audience understanding, here's where to start. Here's where to move forward. Or if it's the content itself, we don't know if our content is readable or usable, or we're finding that just the performance of the content itself isn't there. This is how to move forward with that, because we wanted to make sure that what we learned in the study was actionable and applicable.
That's fascinating. And you offer a lot of this content and a lot of this kind of thinking and documents freely. You give them to people to kind of use to work on their own content strategies themselves, which I think is fabulous, because people need it, and not everybody can afford to hire you, but they can benefit from all of your expertise.
I try, and that's one of the reasons I teach as well. And I've had mentorship groups, and plan to do my own teaching through a woman who's an incredible content strategist in Europe named CJ Walker, and her website is Firehead. So I'm preparing a content strategy course that anybody can take on that also, on that platform.
Well, that's great. And you also have a content strategy for you, or community. You actually run a community.
Yes, so it's at content-strategy.com. And it's a way of really giving back to the content strategy community on a platform that's not LinkedIn, which doesn't have very good group management tools anymore, or Facebook, that a lot of people aren't comfortable focusing on anymore. There is a wonderful and active content strategy community on Facebook, but I wanted to set one up on a platform in case people are not, comfortable doing that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would definitely not be comfortable on Facebook.
Yeah, I think we have about 1,500 members, I think.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure to put the links to your content strategy community, and lots of other content that people would really benefit from. So that'd be great.
Yeah, and I try to use examples and freely share what I know, because I think that it's really hard for people to get all the content strategy stuff in place inside an organization if they have their own full-time job. And so I like to work in close partnership with organizations that already understand the value of this kind of thinking and how it can be applied.
Great. All right. Well, that's all I have. Wow, I have really tied up your time today. It was really great, Hilary. Lots of fabulous information, and some things that I wasn't even thinking about them in that kind of term. So it's really nice to kind of make you kind of step back and rethink what you think works a certain way. So it's fantastic.
Thank you so much.